Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or The Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be going in depth into my top waiver wire ads for week number 7 of the 2022 fantasy football season. Inside today's video, I'll be going in depth into 5 running backs, 5 wide receivers, 3 quarterbacks, and 3 tight ends that I believe you guys should be adding to your fantasy football roster right now. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. And if you do want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. And if you have any questions about week number 7 or maybe tonight's game in week number 6, Broncos versus Chargers, please make sure that you ask down below in the comment section. Also of note, there are 4 teams on bye this week in week 7. The Buffalo Bills, the Los Angeles Rams, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Philadelphia Eagles. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 7 waiver wire ads. We begin with the running back position, headlined by Kenyon Drake of the Baltimore Ravens, going up against the Cleveland Browns on Sunday. Currently, Kenyon Drake's ownership on Yahoo Fantasy is 5%, but if you plan NFL, ESPN, CBS, any of those other fantasy football platforms, then the ownership percentage could be slightly different, and in some cases, the ownership percentage could be drastically different. Now, right now, Drake is currently the RB53 in half PPR. Now, after the Week 6 game, John Harbaugh, head coach of the team, said that Dobbins' knee, quote-unquote, tightened up. And Dobbins, aside from that one big game this year, has been an absolute fucking mess, both on the field in real life and for fantasy football. I think this allows us to pick up Drake. Now, I'm not telling you that Kenyon Drake is a guy that I'm blowing all my fab on, making it rain on Kenyon Drake. I'm not telling you that Kenyon Drake is even a player that is in the must pick up category. But what I am telling you is that if J.K. Dobbins continues to deal with injuries, with how good Kenyon Drake has looked, then I think there is a chance that if J.K. Dobbins potentially misses time, that Kenyon Drake would become a must-start running back. Week 6 up against the New York Football Giants, 10 rushes for 119 yards and a touchdown, 1 reception on 2 targets for 8 yards. This week up against the Cleveland Browns, unless J.K. Dobbins misses, then Kenyon Drake will be on my bench, but I do think he is the number 1 waiver wire ad at the running back position. My number 2 running back to pick up this week is Mike Boone of the Denver Broncos, going up against the New York Jumbo Jets, currently owned in 41% of leagues. Now, Boone is going to be playing in tonight's game up against the LA Chargers. While we have yet to see this game, because I'm not from the fucking future, I'm recording this before Monday Night Football, there is a possibility that if Melvin Gordon continues to fumble the rock, which he keeps doing, he loves fumbling the fucking ball, then Mike Boone could eventually take over and become the number 1 running back on the team. Because if Gordon keeps fumbling, the team, they already struggle offensively. They don't need none of this fumbling bullshit, right? They do not need that with how bad Russell Wilson is playing. They need to keep the ball and keep on moving up the field. So if Gordon keeps struggling, then we could see them go to Boone. Now, there is also this other part of me that thinks that Latavius Murray could end up being the running back number 2 on this team and could actually take over for Melvin Gordon if he ends up getting hurt. Knock on wood, we don't root for injuries, or fumbling. But again, all this means is that we have to monitor what happens in tonight's game up against the Chargers before you put in your waiver claim. If Latavius Murray appears to be the number 2 back, then I don't think you want to pick up Mike Boone. But if Mike Boone continues to operate as the number 2 back on the team, or maybe even in this game takes over for Melvin Gordon in his revenge game up against the Chargers, then Mike Boone would become a player that I really want on my fantasy team. Week 5 up against the Indianapolis Colts, 7 rushes for 38 yards, as well as 3 receptions on 3 targets for 47 yards. So again, make sure you monitor what happens tonight if something crazy happens, right? And Melvin Gordon gets hurt, knock on wood, or if Mike Boone has this crazy game and he just takes over for Melvin Gordon, then I will type that up in the comment section. My number 3 running back to add is Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, going up against the Carolina Panthers in Carolina. Currently, White is owned in 34% of leagues. Now, a couple of weeks ago, after that game up against the Kansas City Chiefs, I've talked about this before, a lot of fantasy players got their panties in a bunch and they started worrying about, oh shit, is Uncle Lenny season over? Is Leonard Fournette going to be riding the pine? Is it Rachaad White time? Well, over the last 2 weeks, it's been really clear that Leonard Fournette is still the workhorse running back on the team. But if there was an injury to happen, Uncle Lenny, knock on wood, we don't root for injuries, Rachaad White appears to be an incredibly strong handcuff. And again, the Bucs haven't really bounced back, right? Last week, the Bucs were a fucking disaster up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? They have this easy matchup. It's like, okay, here is when the Bucs, the Avengers assemble all together. Godwin, Evans, Lenny, they all hit. They all have this big game. Tom Brady looks like he was playing last year, right? That's what we were hoping. And obviously, that game goes a complete 180, right? The Steelers end up winning. Mitch Trubisky, kissing titties Trubisky, torches that defense, and Tom Brady looks fucking lifeless out there. But hey, there is a chance that the Bucs bounce back, and there is, again, a chance that something happens to Lenny. Now, I'm not rooting for an injury, but if something does, Rachaad White might be one of the best handcuffs in all of fantasy football, especially if the Bucs turn it around. Next, we move to my number 4 running back to be adding of the week, Khalil Herbert of the Chicago Bears, going up against the New England Patriots in New England. Currently, Herbert is owned in 60% of leagues. Now, right now, he is the RB18 in half PPR, week 6 up against the Washington Commanders. He has 7 rushes for 75 yards. He almost scores that touchdown on that humongous run he had in that game. He honestly looked like the best player on that Bears offense, but we all know they still want to use David Montgomery. But again, David Montgomery got hurt this season, and we saw Khalil Herbert step in and play big. So now that David Montgomery is back, people might have cut Khalil Herbert in your league. So he's another guy that if you're down bad, your running back core is decimated, then maybe you want to go ahead and pick up Khalil Herbert. Now again, up against the Patriots run defense is A1 like the fucking steak sauce. So you better believe Khalil Herbert would be an awful start against the Patriots. But going forward, maybe he could take over from David Montgomery. I'm not saying he will, but there is a possibility. My final running back here, and then we'll talk about an honorable mention, Caleb Huntley of the Atlanta Falcons going up against the Cincinnati Bengals in Cincinnati, 7% owned on Yahoo. Now, Huntley did outtouch Algier in week 6 up against the Niners, having 17 carries for 59 yards. Now, the Atlanta Falcons obviously have been much better than most people thought they would be. Mariota looks pretty good. We're going to be talking about Mariota a little bit later, spoiler alert, in the quarterback section of today's video. But this team's look good. But without Cordero Patterson, do you really want any of these running backs? Because Algier's still going to be touching the ball. Huntley's going to touch the ball. They also have Avery Williams who's going to touch the ball. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. But I understand that not everyone plays in a fucking 12-team league. Some people play in 16-team leagues where they might be down astronomical at running back because there's a bunch of teams on bye. The Bills, the Rams, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Philadelphia Eagles. So if you're scorching towards the bottom of the barrel, you're kind of just deep down there, your balls deep in the waiver wire, then Caleb Huntley might be the player for you. Again, I don't think he's going to have a huge game, but he's definitely going to be seeing some touches up against the Bengals, and that Bengals defense does not look very good at all. But before we pivot into the wide receiver section of today's video, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our sponsor of today's video over at DraftKings Sportsbook. Now, if you bet $5 on any sports pre-game money line, you will get $200 in free bets if your team wins, if that bet wins on DraftKings Sportsbook. So again, $5 you can turn into $200 in free bets. Now, this pre-game moneyline bet, which means you have to bet before the game starts, has to win. So the best way to find winners is not necessarily in the NFL, because in the NFL, crazy shit happens. We saw last week that the Bucs lost to the Steelers. Everyone and their mother assumed that the Steelers were going to get torched. So we will look towards college football on Saturday. Ohio State minus 12,500 money line versus Iowa. That's about as close to a lock as you're going to get. Notre Dame minus 2,800 up against UNLV, or Oregon State minus 2,800 versus Colorado. So make sure you guys do check that out. Again, bet $5 on any sport pregame money line. Get $200 in free bets if your bet wins. Obviously, you can bet on NFL. You can bet on your favorite team. But since the bet has to win, I do think that you guys should be looking to do the easiest picks, which is college football with those big favorites. Again, Ohio State, Notre Dame, or Oregon State. Make sure you activate the offer by clicking down below in the link in the video description or in the link in the pinned comment. Next up, we move to the wide receiver position, headlined by Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts, going toe-to-toe with the Tennessee Titans, the Les Titans in Tennessee. Currently, Pierce is owned in 38% of leagues on Yahoo. Right now, Pierce is the wide receiver 48.5 PPR through 5 games. In points per game, he is the wide receiver 49.5 PPR. His targets have greatly risen since week 3, having at least 6 targets per game since then. Last week up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, he had 7 targets for 3 receptions, 49 yards, and a touchdown. Now, obviously, Matt Ryan has looked like a fucking skeleton of himself in the past, right? It's spooky season. The man's starting to look like a goddamn skeleton, but hey, he's still throwing the ball a lot to the rookie Pierce. And while Paris Campbell scored a touchdown last week, the odds we see that happen again are slim to none. Paris Campbell is not involved in this offense. And again, Pierce is continuing to ascend up and up this offense. He is getting higher and higher in terms of target share in this offense. And this week, they get the Les Titans. The Titans defense hasn't been that great this season. Now, again, I understand having one of Matt Ryan's receivers might give you a fucking heart attack any given Sunday because, man, oh man, does that man not look good. But hey, he's going to continue to throw the ball to Alec Pierce, and I think that he is worthy of your number 1 waiver wire pickup on the week overall, and he is certainly my number 1 wide receiver. And if you have noticed these names, a lot of these guys, 4 out of 5 of my top wide receiver ads of the week for week 7 are all rookies. Number 2, we got Tyquan Thornton, New England Patriots, going up against the Bears, currently owned in 1% of leagues. Right now is the wide receiver 87, but he's only played in 2 games, and he is currently the wide receiver 29.5 PPR points per game, tied with Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk basically fucking bitch slapped me like his name was Will Smith last week. I talked so negatively about Brandon Ayuk. I was like, oh my God, this guy does the same thing every week. He gets like 9, 10, 12 points. He doesn't really do much for you, and then, of course, he goes crazy. So shout out to Brandon Ayuk, but also shout out to Tyquan Thornton. Week 6 up against the Cleveland Browns, 4 receptions on 5 targets for 37 yards and a score. My only worry about Tyquan Thornton going forward and through the rest of the season is that when Mac Jones returns, whatever that ends up being, maybe Bailey, the Zappinator, Bailey Zappi, ended up stealing his job, then we could end up seeing a dip in production from Thornton. Now, the Patriots, for as long as I can remember, have been like, you know how there's the A1 steak sauce, they're amazing. The Patriots are fucking atrocious. They are awful. They are awful at drafting wide receivers. Maybe that goes into more of a narrative of them throwing the ball more to Tyquan Thornton. I don't think it matters at all. I just think it's pretty interesting because Tyquan Thornton, you know, from like a real 1-game sample size, because his first start, he didn't really do much. But man, oh man, Tyquan Thornton looks good. He's incredibly fast. He's also lanky. He's kind of built like fucking Kevin Durant. I like him this week up against that Bears defense. I think Tyquan Thornton is incredibly interesting. Obviously, Jacoby Myers to me is still the guy to have in New England for the Patriots, but Tyquan Thornton appears to be the number 2 wideout weapon on that team. Next up, we move to Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Football Giants, going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars in Jacksonville, currently owned in 8% of leagues. Robinson is currently the WR111 wide receiver 111 in half PPR, but he's only played in 2 games. He's the wide receiver 79 in half PPR points per game. Last week, though, was his first actual game seeing volume. His first start, he had like 1 fucking target. Last week, up against the Ravens, 3 receptions on 4 targets for 37 yards and a touchdown. This Giants wide receiver core is abysmally bad. They are decimated. They are bad. And it appears that Kadarius Toney, a guy who I really liked in the offseason because of his talent, wants out. He's like, bye-bye, pal. He's pulling a fucking Cam Akers. He wants out of New York. Now, is that 100% true? We know Cam Akers wants out of LA. Is Toney legitimately looking to get traded? I'm not sure, but that's just a rumor that I'm hearing. With little certainty at the wide receiver position, we could see Wan'Dale Robinson develop into a must-start wide receiver weekly with how good this Giants team has been. Now, going into the year, I didn't expect much from the Giants. I don't think many people did, but this Brian Daboll motherfucker is the real deal. He is incredibly legit. He's making Daniel Jones look so much better than Daniel Jones actually is. This offense is humming. They just beat the fucking Ravens. Now I know, but Nick, the Ravens always choke, and yeah, it's so fun dancing on the grave of the Ravens because they always choke the fucking game, right? But at the end of the day, that was a very impressive win for the Giants. That was an incredibly impressive win. And Wan'Dale Robinson, that was his first real fucking game. Imagine what he can do if Tony doesn't come back, if Galladay is constantly banged up, if they don't have many options. Sterling Shepard's already out for the season. They don't have many options, and Wan'Dale Robinson could become the #1 receiver on the team. At number 4, we got Rondale Moore, wide receiver of the Arizona Cardinals, going up against the New Orleans Saints in prime time on Thursday Night Football, 46% owned. The final hurrah for Kyler Murray before Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 drops and Kyler Murray's production drops off the edge of the earth. Now, again, there was this narrative we talked about early on in the season, and if you are new to the channel and you haven't heard me talk about this, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below as well as that like button. But man, I talked about this a bunch. It was incredibly funny. Someone on Reddit went back and did like some legitimate study. Like this was some MLA format cited shit about how Call of Duty, the release of the game, impacts Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray plays video games. Most people play video games. Not a weird thing to say, but it affects his fantasy football output because once COD comes out, then normally you see a decline in production from Kyler. Now, I really kind of just took that, brushed it off, and I said, you know what? You want to know why that is? That's because Cliff Kingsbury is such a fucking dumb motherfucker that by the time COD comes out at the end of October or early November, really depends on the year, they kind of just throw the fucking release date all over the place. I remember as a kid, it seemed to be always in November. Now it's always October. But back to what I was saying, that's typically when Cliff starts having like his downfall and he starts not knowing how to coach. So that's kind of what I attribute things to. I just think that's a funny talking point. Initially, now we got to talk about Hollywood Brown because he got hurt. So initially the worries for Marquise Brown was that he would be out for the season. Then it came out a couple of hours ago as I'm recording this. It's 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday. Ian Rappaport reported that the recovery time for his foot injury is about 6 weeks. Now, we don't want Laris, or whatever that guy's name is, from House of Dragon to see his foot because, you know, he's about to tug one out to that foot of Hollywood Brown. If you haven't seen the show, that's not a spoiler. I guess technically it is, but that was fucking weird. Like, I'll accept the incest, you know, oh, you're fucking your aunt, or you're fucking your sister, or whatever, you know. While it's really weird in real life, it's a TV show, it is what it is. But the fact that he was just cranking off to the queen's foot, incredibly weird, incredibly unsettling, especially since I watched the show with my dad, and it's not as weird like when they're in like the, what is that called? Like the brothel and there's titties everywhere and stuff. It's not that incredibly weird or when they're fucking or anything, but it is a little bit weird when this guy's cranking off to some feet. D-Hop will return this week with Rondale Moore having the shot to elevate himself to the wide receiver 2 in this offense. D-Hop might supercharge this offense. That's the thought of many. Who knows? Right now, we're going to see. I think it will help the offense out. The team also traded for Robbie Anderson after the guy fucking stormed off the field. Initially, I was joking like, oh, he's like Antonio Brown hitting the peace sign. But in reality, the coach basically just chomped him out. So get out of here, pal. We don't want you anymore. And he went to the locker room. And then he got traded today to the Panthers. But to me, or to the from the Panthers to the Cardinals. But to me, kind of fool's gold. Robbie Anderson, currently the wide receiver 90. This is Rondale Moore through 3 games. And points per game, he's wide receiver 68. One off of being wide receiver 69. Very nice. I like. Oh, that was awful. Very nice. I like. Wide receiver 6 up against the Seahawks, or week 6 up against the Seahawks. He was not the wide receiver 6. I'll tell you that much. But he had 6 receptions on 10 targets for 49 yards. He was a guy I played heavily in DFS on DraftKings. Didn't work out too well. But hey, the volume was there. Maybe Kyler figures shit out this week. Final wide receiver to discuss here, Jameson Williams, Detroit Lions wide receiver. I don't know why in my head I just want to hit the Jason Derulo, but it doesn't sound the same when you hit the Jameson Williams. Doesn't sound as good. Lions up against the Cowboys in Dallas, 32% owned. It appears that we are close to the return of Williams. It doesn't seem like it's going to be this week, based upon what I have read, but he should return close to early November. So if you keep waiting, and it's like, oh, now we know when Jameson Williams is going to come back, then someone's already going to scoop him. He's only owned in 32% of leagues right now. If you have an IR spot on your team, you need to pick this motherfucker up. If you're not in a league with an IR spot, it is more difficult to pick up Williams. Because again, we're still like 2-3 weeks out potentially from his return, but with how good this Lions offense has looked, aside from that game up against the Patriots where they got a new asshole torn out for him, I do believe that Jameson Williams, who is incredibly fast, could potentially be an upper echelon wide receiver start weekly with the Lions. Next up, we pivot to the quarterback position, headlined by Marcus Mariota of the Atlanta Falcons, going up against the Cincinnati Bengals in Cincinnati. Right now, Mariota is owned in 14% of leagues, and currently he is the QB 12 in all of fantasy football. Week 6 up against the Niners. Nick, you owe the Falcons an apology. Maybe I do, because the Falcons, I was dragging their name through the mud. I was like, this is a lock. The 49ers are going to hit them from the back. Hit it from the fucking back, sweetly into the nighttime. And man, oh man, was I wrong, because the Falcons whipped out the fucking Draco and sprayed all over the Niners. 13 completions on 14 attempts. He only threw the ball 14 times, but we don't expect him to throw the ball a lot. 129 yards and 2 tugs, 6 rushes for 50 yards and a tug. That is 3 total tugs on Sunday. Those are like Deshaun Watson level numbers of tugs, or Robert Kraft. But shout out to Robert Kraft for getting married. Shout out Robert Kraft. But Marcus Mariota's looked good. He has. He's not very fun to watch, because like he throws the ball like fucking 15, 20 times a game, but he runs the ball enough to be start worthy. And that Bengals defense was getting carved up like a Thanksgiving turkey by fucking Andy Dalton. So yeah, I kind of do like Marcus Mariota this week. Jimmy Guap, Jimmy G-Spot, Jimmy Pornstar, the 49ers is number 2 up against the Chiefs. 39% own a Super Bowl rematch for Jimmy Garoppolo, a revenge game of sorts. Currently the quarterback 20 if he started every game of the season instead of Trey Lance. He'd be the quarterback 19 because of points per game. Week 6 up against the Atlanta Falcons. 29 completions on 41 attempts for 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. 3 rushes for 11 yards. If you started Jimmy Garoppolo like I told you to last week, then obviously things didn't work out very well. Now, he didn't necessarily shit the bed, because he still threw 2 touchdowns, still threw for some yards, and he threw 2 interceptions, right? It wasn't a good game out of Jimmy Garoppolo, but it also wasn't awful. But again, you had high hopes for this motherfucker up against the Falcons defense. Again, I just envisioned just decimation from Jimmy Guap, Jimmy G-Spot, Jimmy Pornstar, that he was going to dissect that defense like a fucking, like you had to do in science when you dissect a frog, you know what I'm saying? Just an easy game for him. Doesn't end up being like that. I thought it was a layup, a slam dunkaroo, and it wasn't. Up against the Chiefs defense is pretty good, but again, there's so many teams on bye. The quarterbacks to stream this week are a little bit down bad. So we got Jimmy G-Spot, again, 39% owned, final quarterback before we pivot into the tight end position. We got Ryan Tannehill of the Atlanta Titans going up against the Indianapolis Colts, currently 17% owned on Yahoo. Right now, Tannehill is the QB 25 in fantasy football. We got to look back to week 5 for his stats, because in week 6 he was on bye. Week 5 up against the Commanders, 15 completions on 25 attempts for 181 yards and a touchdown, 3 rushes for 3 yards. Tannehill hasn't looked great this year, but the Colts defense has, you smell that? They stink. They fucking stink. So, like, if there was ever a game for Tannehill to look pretty good, it would be this week. To close out the video, we move to the tight end position, headlined by Big Bob Tonyan of the Green Bay Packers, going up against the Commanders in Washington, 42% owned right now in Yahoo. Currently the tight end number 11 in half PPR. Week 6 up against the Jumbo Jets in a disaster of a game for the Packers. How do you lose to the Jets? The Jets, you were 7 to 7.5 point favorites, and you got skull fucked by the Jets. 10 receptions on 12 targets for 90 yards, and it's not on the defense. I know the Packers defense should be better, but it's on you, Mr. Aaron Rodgers, Mr. Discount Double Check, Mr. MVP back-to-back, Jordan 96, 97 the last 2 years. The Packers stink. They stink. But hey, Robert Tonyan's still playing good. 12 targets last week. I don't expect that this week, but the Commanders' defense is soft as baby shit, so Tonyan could be in for a solid performance. I don't know what fucking noise my mouth just made. but I'm keeping it in because it sounded kind of funny. Next up, we got Daniel Bellinger, tight end of the New York Football Giants, going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars in Jacksonville, currently owned in 3% of leagues, currently the tight end 14.5 PPR. Week 6 up against the Ravens, 5 receptions on 5 targets for 38 yards and a touchdown. He has gotten much more involved in the offense as the weeks have gone on, and again, this wide receiver core is down astronomical, down fucking tremendous with all these injuries, with Kadarius Toney seemingly wanting a fucking trade. So Bellinger keeps getting more targets, keeps getting more work, and that's great for Daniel Bellinger. And as a rookie, he's honestly been pretty impressive. Normally it takes these rookies a while to kind of develop and start playing well at the tight end position. Final tight end, former New York Football Giant, Easy E. Evan Ingram of the Jacksonville Jaguars going up against the Giants. We might say this is a revenge game. 37% owned. Currently the tight end 18.5 PPR. Week 6 up against the Colts. 5 receptions on 6 targets for 40 yards. Back-to-back games with 6 or more targets. His involvement in this offense seems to be improving. So again, while Evan Ingram has been kind of hit or miss this season, the tight end position is really hard to like truly predict, right? I go into the week, I try to predict where these guys are going to finish. Very hard this year. Very, very hard, like a cock on Cialis. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did end up enjoying, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, as well as hitting that like button. It would help me out a ton. If you do want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. And please make sure you check out our sponsor of today's video. I'm pointing to him right now, DraftKings. Make sure that you bet $5 using the link in the video description if you are brand new to DraftKings. Any sport pregame money line, you will get $200 in free bets if that bet wins. Again, if the bet wins, so make sure you go with one of those big college football favorites. Ohio State minus 12,500 up against Iowa. Notre Dame minus 2,800 up against UNLV, or Oregon State minus 2,800 up against Colorado. Make sure you guys check that all out. I hope you guys have a great rest of your guys' day. Enjoy Mr. Unlimited, Mr. Dangerous Russell Wilson tonight up against the Chargers. Hope you guys have a great night. I love you guys all. And as always, guys, good boy!